All right, guys, we are going to go ahead and get ready. Thank you so much for joining us today. So my name is Veronica Snell, and I'm the Emerging Leader Coordinator at AFCEA International, and I'm very excited to welcome you to today's panel, the Emerging Leaders Disruptive by Design panel, utilizing existing enterprise systems to combat fraud, waste, and abuse. For those who may not know, AFCEA's Emerging Leaders are made up of our members who are aged 40 and under. I want to stress, though, that our panelists with us today are not here solely based because of their age. They are here because of their expertise and experience in their fields, and they just happen to be under the age of 40. We appreciate your time and support for our panelists today. You are in for a great session, as our emerging leaders always have a great perspective on IT, AI, and cyber. This session has been pre-qualified to support continuing education requirements for several cybersecurity certifications. So if you are an AFCEA member seeking attendance documentation, please be sure to scan your badge located at the back seating area at the conclusion of this session. Scanners will shut off 15 minutes post-session, so please get your badge scanned before networking with me and the other attendees. Also note that to qualify for CEs, the session must run a full 60 minutes. That 60 minutes can include questions and answers, so please have questions ready so that we can fill that time. Full details of continuing education programs are available in the conference app and on the conference website. So to start off with, I would like to introduce to you our moderator for today, Sean Vineyard. Sean is the Vice President of Business Development at TRIA Federal, bringing nearly 20 years of federal growth, operations, and risk management expertise. A servant leader, strategist, and published author, he has a proven track record of advancing corporate strategy, improving customer success, and driving delivery excellence. At TRIA, Sean leads efforts to expand service offerings and market presence, building on his prior leadership roles in business development and advisory service. Before joining TRIA, he was a partner at 11th Hour Service, where he focused on corporate strategy, performance management, and federal enterprise risk management programs. Sean will introduce our panelists and moderate the discussion, so please join me in giving a warm welcome for Sean.
Awesome, thank you. I'm actually going to let our panelists introduce themselves first, and then we'll kind of jump into things. So I'll go over to Andy.
Thank you, Sean and Veronica. Andy Andrews, I'm the Federal Health and Military Health Lead at Databricks. I help lead our business with the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, Military Health, Defense Health, TRICARE. I spend a lot of time focusing on how do we use AI and data integration tooling to support the elimination of fraud, waste, and abuse, identification of it, proactively stopping payments and improper payments before they go out. Before that, I was the VA lead, led the VA business at Palantir Technologies. We did a lot of similar financial work, more on the identification of improper payments, but also a lot of contract reobligation and deobligation workflows too. So yeah, with that, I'll introduce Master Sergeant Ost.
Yeah, thanks. Master Sergeant Celeste Ost. I'm a software product manager at the Army Software Factory under Army Futures Command in Austin, Texas. We build software for soldiers by soldiers. We have kind of a vast portfolio of different things that we look at, but we've run into some cases where we've been able to identify a waste within the Department of the Army and stop that from moving forward. So looking forward to the discussion today.
Awesome, all right. So I want to kind of set the stage because I'm sure as folks sign up to fight enemies, both foreign and domestic, the first thing that comes in their mind is probably not fraud, waste, and abuse. And I'm not sure, has anyone here had really the privilege of being in a meeting or discussing anything with David Norquist, former DepSec? I worked for him for about almost 10 years, but about 15 years ago. And I won't say whose office we were in, but we were in the Pentagon, in a flag officer's office, and we had a series of conversations similar to the ones we're gonna have today. And it got escalated, continued to get escalated. We had the ability to sit in front of this flag officer, and he got right to the point and said, "Tell me why I should care about fraud, waste, and abuse." And I remember, so Dave Norquist is a very, very eloquent speaker, and I remember he looked him dead in the face and sat there and said, "Well, let me put it this way. If you had a daughter or a son who wanted to play a sport, was good at it, have the ability to get some specialized coaching or to join a travel league, and you found out you couldn't afford it because someone took the money that you would have set aside to do that. What length would you go to get that money back, to put your child through that? Think about it as the soldiers as your children and your family. If you have the ability to improve lethality, to improve safety, to improve capabilities of our soldiers by eliminating or reducing fraud, waste, and abuse, would you not give that same level of fight to be able to figure out where that money's going and offer that, right? You can employ more people, you can improve their skill set, you can do all of these things. And I remember sitting in that meeting, and it was probably one of the quickest meetings I've ever had. It was all of 6 or 7 minutes, and he said, okay, let's do this. Because now I understand it's not just about auditors, it's not just about going in and trying to find these issues of what's going wrong. It's about returning that money and being able to spend those resources where it's supposed to be spent. And so I want to kind of go into this conversation with that in mind, right? I want to sort of set the stage too, that not everything about fraud, waste, and abuse is about the things that hit the headlines, the big fraud. I'm sure everyone's seen all the stuff from CMS lately about some of these big crackdowns with fraud. Those are great. There's a significantly greater portion of resources that are probably in that waste and abuse bucket, right? And it's not necessarily nefarious. It's just there, and we could better use those resources. So what we want to really try and do today is we want to talk about how anyone can sort of incrementally get involved in supporting this fraud, waste, and abuse mission, right? You don't have to have this massive enterprise deployment of this huge technology stack and these big teams, right? You can start small and have an impact and use existing infrastructure to be able to do that. So we're really going to focus on diving into that type of the conversation of how you can really get started now with very little to minimal training and guidance. And so, Master Sergeant, as we were doing some of the prep for this, I think you've got a ton of great use cases around, particularly the waste side of this. We talked a lot about how would someone even get started? How would they know what tools are available to them, where they would even start? Maybe if you can share from your journey and sort of how the software factory supports this part of the mission. How do we go about identifying what tools we have available and what systems are available to us to be able to start down this journey?
Yeah, so there are so many tools out there. We pay for so many licenses for so many things across the enterprises, whether it's DoD or any of these other federal agencies. There's licenses out there. It's just finding out what is available. I think networking with other agencies is a great place to start. The software factory, we do take in problem submissions, and a lot of times we just don't have the bandwidth to work on those. But what our product office is really good about doing is pointing folks in the direction to go ahead and maybe find something that we already have, find an existing solution that we already have available, or just connecting them with another unit who may be facing a similar issue so they can try and get those best practices. These type of venues, I think, are a great place to kind of find out those things. Yesterday, I went to a workshop with Netcom to learn more about A365 and Azure and what we're doing in those spaces, which is going to help us maybe deploy in the future some additional pathways from the Army Software Factory. But I think just really networking with folks and finding out people that are in your same space and how they're dealing with it, because there's likely already an enterprise solution out there to help solve a problem.
Yeah, and I think one of the important parts about this, right? I mean, I think in almost every agency, we deploy Microsoft 365. So every agency and everyone who has a login, at least on a .mil or .gov login, has access to Power Apps. So we're going to talk a little bit more here shortly about Power Apps specifically, but it's Microsoft products there are free versions that are included in almost every user profile. So immediately you've got something on your machine that you can start working and start exploring, in addition to some other tools that are going to be available depending on where you are. But Andy, so a lot of I guess in anything in life, right? Starting something is half the battle, right? It's once you get started, often there's momentum. So, but kind of building up the courage or just convincing yourself that this is a good idea, getting starting is half the battle. So we talked a lot about starting small. You don't need to solve a grandiose problem, as great as that would be. Also significantly more difficult, right? Maybe walk us through a bit, Andy, about how you approach looking at and considering use cases that can be quickly deployed or easier to solve.
Yeah, I mean, think about the work I do with my clients every day. The vast majority of our time is spent on driving use cases. And I think the hardest part about that is identifying which ones you want to start with and prioritizing that. To me, it's the ones that are the highest value, are very high value, but also very high on the feasibility and low lift standpoint. So maybe working with data and systems that you already have access to that are relevant to whatever it is you're trying to solve here, and then from there it says, okay, so what are you trying to solve here? What is the goal of this use case? What are the outcomes you're striving for? Is it identifying potentially fraudulent vendors or payments, or is it looking at businesses that have maybe been flagged before, and maybe before setting out that payment, looking into different facets and relevant variables that says, hey, is this someone that we want to send a payment for? Even as recently as the pandemic relief fund, there was one address in San Francisco that had over 1,300 different businesses that were applying for these PPP loans and what have you. So like that obviously should be, is a very solvable problem. You don't need the latest and greatest technology to recognize that, hey, that maybe this doesn't look right, and maybe before setting out those payments, it's we should investigate it further. I think even to Sean's point, I thought that was a really great analogy and eloquent story about a very tangible example. But I found myself thinking, okay, to the length you would go back, you would go to get back that payment to help that your child, and I think that is a problem that they're really facing here is. They've identified over $2.2 trillion in fraud the last 25 years of taxpayer money. If you're, and that's just the payments. The problem is that traditionally they've done this pay and chase model where you send the payment out and then go find out, oh, it was fraud. But that costs 3 to 6 times on average of administrative fees to go back and recover those payments. And that's also valuable time and resources that we could use on much more important things. So, there's a lot to that. But again, you're kind of going back to where do we get started? I think we look at outcomes, KPIs to hit that. Who are the relevant stakeholders? I think we're just going to spend a lot of time today talking about working directly with end users, the business practitioners. I think that's really important when you think about effectively designing a workflow here. And then from there, I always like to start with an architectural drawing. So, on the left, far left on that first part is, okay, what are the data sources and systems that we have available to us that are going to be necessary to this? It could be, things like addresses in that example I just gave, or, potential, incorrect answers, or things that could lead to anomalies, or even just records of people, businesses, payments, transactions, etc.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great way to start framing it, right? And I think you mentioned something that's really important. I think Master Sergeant is going to not break her microphone, but we'll hit on this too, right? Tackling fraud, waste, and abuse is ultimately about solving a problem, right? And there's a lot of problems, again, that are not nefarious. So I remember even one time supporting Marine Corps around a problem they were looking at. I'm sure you guys have heard it now, right? Doing warehouse modernization, right? They were really looking at improving RFID capabilities so that movement of assets were better tracked in real time. Years ago, I remember having a conversation with the deputy commandant, thinking it was going to be this massive, massive contract to be able to get this done, because his teams now were too tied up in everything else to be able to support some of this. So he couldn't deploy his own team to be able to do this. Did very quick analysis. Actually, it was in Tableau at the time. It wasn't Power Apps, but similar type of functionality. And I don't know about you. I have plenty of times that in work I do stuff that is not what I would want to be doing, but I'm getting requests from other places, and I say, yes, sir, yes, ma'am, and I do it. But so, they found out over the course of a 3-week period, right, that people were actually widely available to be able to do this, but they were getting significant volumes of requests to do things that had little to no to do with his priorities. And so by being able to do that and going back to those folks who are making those requests, he now freed up in what ended up saving him close to $50 million and being able to put an acquisition together and saying, I can do this sooner than I thought, and it's going to be cheaper than I thought because there's people that work for me that are doing things that don't really matter, and I can free up that time. And so again, that goes back into just waste, right? It's not nefarious, but now he understands that there was a problem he needed to solve. He figured it out, and now it allows him to accomplish a greater good or a greater goal of what he was trying to do. And so I think starting small, even if it's at a senior level, is still important. So one of the concepts we talked a lot about, and I'm not sure how familiar folks are with human-centered design, but a really important part about when you're trying to solve a problem for a group of people who aren't going to understand how you're solving the problem. If it's the technology, most people don't care what your tech stack is. They have a problem, they want it solved. They come to you to do that. But Master Sergeant, if you can just walk us through kind of what human-centered design is, why it's important in the output, and so as you're looking at tools, as you're looking at how you engage, why is that so critical to being successful?
Yeah, I think you brought up a good point about outputs and outcomes, and that's something that we really focus on at the Software Factory. So outputs are going to be features, widgets, the buttons, the things that we do, right? The things that we deliver. Outcomes, we focus on outcomes as being changes in user behavior. And you can't change the user behavior if you don't understand what the current behavior is. And so that's why we use human-centered design to really focus in on what the human is actually doing with the process or the product while we're developing what we're going to actually solve for the problem. And it first just starts with finding out what the user is doing as their current process. So we try not to say that users lie, because they don't lie all the time on purpose, but they do, right? So if you ask somebody how they accomplish a task, they're going to give you the book answer, the steps A through Z, this is exactly what I do. But when you actually watch them do it, you see they skip step B and G and D, right? You'll see that they continue skipping things because either that part of the process is broken or that 18th different spreadsheet they have to open is corrupted, or they just know a way to get around it. So not only asking them about their process, but watching them actually do it helps you then design whatever the future is going to look like in your product that you're going to deliver. We use software as a product generally, but that's not the only products that we really deliver at the Software Factory. We also look at process improvement because there's many efficiencies that can be gained solely in changing processes. But you're not going to be able to change the process if you don't have a holistic understanding of what the process is from start to finish, what it's supposed to be, and then what it is and why it is that way is kind of where human-centered design enters the picture. And we try and stay focused on that throughout the entire software development lifecycle.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that's unique about the Army Software Factory, right, is the fact that it is what would you call it? Soldier-centered design, right? I mean, and so maybe if you can give us a little bit of what are some of the unique ways that you all are tackling that? Because human-centered design in Department of Commerce is wildly different than in the Army, and kind of how you're approaching that, because it's probably sort of hyper-focused, the importance of that, because they're deployed in austere environments and doing, more dangerous things than someone that's at HHS or at VA. So tell us how you're kind of crafting your human-centered design to take that into consideration.
Yeah, that's one of the things I think makes us most unique at the Army Software Factory is that we are soldiers. We do wear the uniform every day, so we do already somewhat understand what soldiers are going through. But we really focus on getting out to the point of them actually using the product. So one of the products that I've worked on previously was for Ranger School. So instead of just asking them the process or going to them in their office when they're between cycles to see what they're doing, we went out there with them while they were doing patrols. And Ranger School patrols are all day and all night. And that's what we did, right? We walked through the woods with them all day and all night to see exactly what they were doing, to see how they were inputting data, to see what was happening in those transition periods so that we could bring that back. Another example is we did a medical logistics problem. And in this problem, what we saw was they have a station of computers in the warehouse where they were updating spreadsheets. And then they would go to pack a box or to inventory a box. They would take a picture of it with their cell phone, go over to where the boxes were, do that inventory, then come back and update that spreadsheet because they were tied to a location with their laptops plugged into the network. And so we decided to go mobile first on that and look at a mobile design that they could then use on their phones, their personal devices, to go and do that inventory on the spot, which reduced errors and made sure that they were getting that information. One key thing was we delivered this in 7 days, and it was not pretty, but it didn't need to be pretty because it did what it needed to do. So this is our first look at what we delivered originally. I look back at it now, and I'm a little bit cringed by just seeing that that's what we delivered, but it worked, right? It did everything that they needed it to do, but it wasn't welcoming to the point where they would want to use it because it didn't look like anything else they were using. This is the Power Apps native design. So this is everything that comes in the box that you would use. You would deploy a Power App. Anytime you open up a Power App, it's going to be that like normal blue styling. And we just left it as is so that we could get the product out so that they could start using it, so that we could start iterating on that. I generally fight quite hard with my designers about when is the time that we need to make it pretty versus when is the time we need to just get it out there so that they can use it and we can iterate on that. Our second iteration is a little bit better. We still have some of the older Power App-esque designs in here with the blue on top, but we have made it look a little bit better, a little bit more inviting. And then finally, we got to like a full mobile design that looks something like they would be using on their regular cell phone, that they would be more comfortable using. It doesn't look as blocky. It's very 2025 instead of XP is what I like to call the original Power Apps design system. It looks very like Windows XP. We're just moving this forward so that soldiers are more comfortable using it. But this iteration didn't happen until we had already done multiple iterations of the functionality to make sure that it was actually going to work for them to be able to do their job. And then we moved on to making it pretty.
Yeah, and I think there's sort of this important concept in agile, really doing software development. But even if you're doing it and it's not true software, if you're using Excel, if you're using basic databases, right? Getting buy-in on the output and functionality of what you're trying to solve, right? If you brought something to your leadership and it worked, but it looked atrocious, right? Your leadership's probably gonna be like, okay, I get it. It's working. It's doing what we need it to do, as opposed to if you spent 90% of your time making it look pretty, but it accomplished nothing, right? So the focus around that is what you'll often hear called fail fast, right? And so get something produced or get something done, learn if it's meeting what you need it to do. And if it's not, iterate, go back, fix it, improve it, and continue to do that as you continue to build up sort of adoption and people using it and what it can do. That will also then improve functionality, things like that. So I think in sort of the next part of this, right, when we talk about wanting to know processes just as good as the end user, Master Sergeant and then Andy, we'll kind of get your thoughts on this too, right? It's a tricky situation to make sure that people are going to be willing to invest their time to be able to help you understand that process. How do you start and how do you build up that trust to be able to understand in more detail the process that you can then help support fix? Because we may have instances where you are the end user, right? You're trying to fix a process you're involved in and it's easier, but it's not always, it might be something that you're getting annoyed with that you're sort of tangentially a part of. How did you approach that and how do you approach that?
Yeah, process mapping is like a real key to success for everything we do at the software factory. But more so than just the process mapping portion, it's involving the users in that process mapping, right? And so gaining their trust. Like I said, I worked on a product with Ranger Training Battalion. I'm not a ranger. I'm not somebody that they would be used to seeing in their footprint. So I was a little bit concerned going in there to say, hey, I think that your process might be broken. But because I went out there, I walked through those patrols with them, I gained their trust. They recognized that I was going to be there and help them through their actual problem. The battalion commander was more than willing to change their processes. And once we laid it all out and said, okay, sir, you have 17 different spreadsheets that you're trying to input this information into. That's unsustainable. There's a reason that you're not getting the data that you need. Let's try and see what we can do to improve that. He was on board because he knew that we were there for the right reasons. We weren't there because we wanted to get a contract to make a lot of money. We were there because we wanted to help his soldiers do their job and not focus. But then also having the users give you input if you are making changes. So we had one Ranger instructor that we worked very closely with who we would say, okay, we want to change this process from this way to another way. What does that break inside of your current process? And he could let us know, like, yes, that's a viable path, or no, because the commander needs to see XYZ before we move there. And so having those users in with you makes them champions. And so we had this Ranger instructor who was just a champion for us and helping us talk to the other Ranger instructors and get them on board to what we wanted to be able to accomplish, because we knew that that was the right direction. But if we just went wholesale and said, we want to change your process, here you go, here's the new process, and also here's new software that aligns with this process, it wasn't going to work. And much with the medical problem, when we saw that originally, their process was extremely broken. They weren't doing several steps that were key to identifying the waste, and that's where we came in and identified millions of dollars of waste in that space, was because they were just packing the boxes and shipping the boxes. That was all they were doing. They weren't doing any sort of in-processing of their bulk equipment coming in. So they had a ton of supplies that would just go onto the shelf and then die on the shelf, as we say, because they would expire while they were waiting to be packed into those boxes, because there was no in-processing portion on their process map. So that was one of the first things we did. Okay, when you get new inventory, it needs to go into this bulk category where you can see what needs to get either pushed into boxes or pushed down to other units. And so not only did we identify the waste there, we gave them pathways forward where they could reduce that waste by being able to issue it in a fashion down to their down trace units, which not only did we identify $4 million of expired and excess medical supplies at the beginning, because we walked through this process with them and helped improve the process, we identified $4.6 million annually that they can go ahead and issue to downtrace units that are going out for training that don't have the budget to get the medical supplies. Why don't they have the budget? Because it's been spent on these supplies that are dying in the warehouse anyway, right? And so if we don't get the users on board with the current process and then the process changes, we really are missing the mark there. Andy?
I think that's a great example of something that's so tangible and beneficial, and the methodology and way you went about finding that out. It reminds me of the story's a few years old at this point, but I think it has a lot of relevancy both to the question and topic at hand. In the past, I did a lot of work with the then U.S. Digital Service, now Doge, or similar to Software Factory, puts a ton of emphasis on very modern technologies, top development and engineering talent, but even more than that, working with users on user research and human-centered design. And at the time, I was working with U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, and they're the largest integrated healthcare system in the country. 171 hospitals, 1,200 clinics, an enormous agency, $280 billion in budget. And it's something I very near to my heart. I think when our soldiers take an oath to put their life on the line for our freedoms, like, we have an obligation to make sure that we take care of them and their families for the rest of their lives, that they have the best health care, that they have great access to the benefits that they earned, and that their experience is great, and the thing runs better than Kaiser or United. So it's a time, it's a place that I spend a lot of time trying to make significant strides and improvements. And a few years ago, a executive client and friend of mine was before Congress, and the issue at hand was related to medical supply chain, not too similar to the story we just talked about. And they said, well, DoD makes about 10% of their purchases on government purchase cards, credit cards. What percentage does VA do? Because we're hearing that it's a very high number, but we need the exact figures. And why are they doing that? You guys have all these pre-negotiated contracts and rates with the top medical suppliers in the country. Why is someone using a credit card? That seems like bad actors and frauds, and they would come up with these fake stories about someone swiping a card 5,000 or several times a day for $5,000 and not having an item to track it back to. And so we looked at this problem. We looked at the logisticians. We looked at the clinicians. We looked at the hospitals. We looked at the people who do inventory. We looked at all sorts of relevant stakeholders and talked to them and met with them and understand their process. And at the end of the day, it turned out to be a much different situation than what we thought. Like these logisticians were in an incredibly stressful environment where they are under-resourced, understaffed. They're working for clinicians who are under-resourced and understaffed. And they're talking to someone who says, hey, I need this piece of equipment for a surgery later today that's going to save someone's life. So they're not thinking like, oh, let's go order something. It's like we need this now, and that's the highest priority. Saving a life is more important than anything else. And we also found that they just didn't have the main reason why they were using these cards is that they didn't have any system or process at all that could do the function on its own. There was no ordering mechanism that could work for them or link to these contracts that Congress was talking about that do exist with pre-negotiated rates. And if there were, every hospital was a little bit decentralized, which is another part of the problem. But if they were, it could take weeks or months, and they don't have a system that could track how that item would get to their hospital or where it would be stored in a warehouse or a closet or what the inventory was. So it's a situation where we need to start with the end user and the folks that are doing these things and really develop something that will work for them. And I don't think we've done a good enough job of that, but I know that if and when we will, and there'll be so many different people involved who have relevant expertise in this area, but it's something that will save money. It'll improve the lives of the logisticians and clinicians by making them have a better work environment and be more effective. And most importantly of all, it'll save lives and lead to improved health outcomes.
Yeah, and I think one of the things, right? So, okay, let's say we have figured out what our sort of use case is going to be, what problem we want to solve. We've now kind of worked with end users to understand that environment at a level of detail that gives us familiarity to better solve that problem. And now we figured out what tools we have access to. One of the things we didn't talk a ton about, but we have this morning is, Master Sergeant, you talked a lot about there's this great value in the fact that you have people who have non-software development background, very specialized fields who are now coming in and learning how to use and build software and build these solutions, and they have a significantly greater outcome and output because they have that level of familiarity. But obviously they're having to be trained on tools and things like that that are beyond what they're used to. How are you approaching that? And so I want to be able to kind of set the stage then for folks in here that are like, okay, I've figured this out so far. Now I know what tools I have available, but like, where do I go other than YouTube maybe to try and learn the product and how I can actually start building something and producing something?
Yeah, that's a great point. So when soldiers come to the Army Software Factory, we put them through a technical accelerator that's focused on JavaScript programming. All these low-code, no-code solutions like Power Apps, Palantir Foundry, all of those things don't necessarily correlate to JavaScript programming, right? And so we luckily had an engineer on the team who already had some experience in Power Apps, but a lot of it was just learning as we went and failing fast, right? And part of that too is that there are vendor trainings out there that are already covered by contracts. People just don't know about them. So it's finding out what training these vendors may offer and then utilizing those contracts that already exist to get that training. Another thing we're doing is as we're handing off these power apps, because that's another great point about using existing enterprise systems, is that there is no maintenance tail, there is no additional funding, there is no anything that the customer that we're delivering to has to do differently on their end to be able to sustain these tools long term. We just give it to them, but we also provide them training to at least, hey, if something breaks, this is how you fix it. But there is so many resources out there, especially inside like the Army space. There's many different Teams channels that are available to help folks get started and to get that additional training that they may need. There's like Power Platform Center of Excellence on Teams that does a great job at not only keeping folks updated with changes, with licensing changes, which we all know is a constant struggle throughout the department, but also just people out there that are sharing their knowledge and answering questions when something that you have isn't working. So I think, again, it just like goes back to networking and finding folks that have this information and being able to get it. And then also just working with vendors who already have these contracts that are supposed to be supporting you with training. They're not going to advertise like, hey, let me come train you, but it is available if you reach out and get that with the contract.
Yeah, and Andy, maybe this kind of part of the question is kind of for you, but I think because we're using existing products, there's people who are already trained internally, right? Everyone's heard of the concept of train the trainer. There's a high likelihood we have a community of people who are already trained. If you've now said, okay, I've got Power Apps, or I've got Databricks or Snowflake or Palantir, whatever it may be, right? There's probably a user community already doing this. Using your network sometimes yields zero results, but we've had instances where we'll actually encourage folks to reach out to that provider, and they will tell you who in the agency that you're supporting or that you're in, they directly support. So you can actually reach out to them specifically, right? Maybe through Andy and say, hey, who else in the agency is actually using this product? So I can know immediately who I can reach out to and help train me, right? Help give me some insight on how to get started. Does that often happen with you, Andy? Or maybe not as frequent, but how would you encourage some of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think even looking at fraud, waste, and abuse, and going from that like pay and chase model to stopping things in real time or preemptively, like that usually involves machine learning, advanced analytics, AI products, agents. Like these are things that I didn't even, a lot of these things I didn't even know about like as little as a year ago. So I think training and awareness is the utmost important. I know like the vast majority training that I've taken throughout my career, didn't have someone with the appreciation of Master Sergeant Ost on how do we think about the end user and design something that is going to be effective and digestible for them. So I think anytime you can use that or do more of that, and I'm seeing more and more of that, particularly in this space like that. That's huge. And to Sean's point as well, I think there's the technical training part of it, but there's also like, okay, what are others doing that is as relevant to you? I'm a huge fan of not reinventing the wheel. I think being in the open source space like helps that, because a lot of things are, can be lifted and shifted to like, what something that another large organization would do would be similar to, Army in terms of, moving vast amounts of equipment or even if you take stopping bad actors or identifying improper payments. Like why don't you use things that like large banks like JP Morgan Chase or when they're handling 25% of the global transactions daily. There's a lot that we can leverage, but to Sean's point, also inside an agency too. So I really believe in that cross agency, intra-agency, across agencies, and interagency, as well as collaboration with the private sector too, to say, hey, This problem is there are unique facets to it, to our agency, our maybe our soldiers, but a lot of it is consistent across other disciplines or fields or our agencies. Like let's borrow what's worked, best practices that have worked, and learn from them, implement them within our own problem set.
Yeah, and maybe this was actually jumping ahead to one of our other questions, but not sticking within just the Army, not sticking with just inside of the organization that you're in. Maybe if you wanted to expand on that a little bit, Andy, and kind of what are some techniques, how to identify what other agencies are out there using this, and how to start that reach out and engagement so they can start kind of learning a little bit quicker.
Yeah, I think your point on collaboration is probably best. I mean, I think one of my least favorite things about this year is the fact that so many of my clients and friends and people I don't even know within government have not been able to travel. I think a lot of that happens at places like this. So I think it's great for all of you and the people you work with and organizations you represent that you're here. So that that's a big part of it. I think talking to people internally is great. But then one of my favorite things of like all these Gen AI technologies that we're using in our everyday consumer life or professional life is it's so easy to find information. I would if I'm thinking about maybe like it could be anything, like maybe claims work that one of the top insurers are doing. I can very easily go to a ChatGPT or a Grok or a Perplexity and find just massive amounts of data in a short amount of time. And I know I can look very easily to say, okay, where did this information come from? Is it reliable? Is it trustable? Et cetera. That doesn't take long. A lot of times, if I was working within my own organization or trying to do research externally, like something like that could take days, weeks. It could be a series of meetings. I might not even know where to go. So to me, like I think that would be a good place. Or some of my recommendations for things like that.
Yeah, and so I think now, like in this journey, right, we've identified a use case, figured out our tool sets, understand the process, hopefully got a little bit of training and got up to speed on the tools that we've selected. I think the next big part is understanding the data. So is anyone in here like deep in the data side? Data analyst or on the expert side? So I think you're going to be in a unique situation, right, where you can already have a good grasp around kind of how you approach understanding data, right? So I'll share sort of a concept, and the concept itself is more complex and is often necessary, but the concept is founded in creating connections in the data, right? And I'm sure people have heard of a concept called a data lake or a data lakehouse, right? And what many now are probably starting to hear called the data fabric, right? The core concept of this is that when you've got more than one system that you're trying to pull information from and understand, is that separately those sets of data are only going to do and support whatever the processes that system supports. But in so many instances of fraud, waste, and abuse, it's an amalgamation of that data. It's things that are getting transferred from one system to another. So this concept of a data mesh is really the fact that it's connecting key data points within each of those systems to each other. How they drive each other, how they feed each other, what they mean, how they're interpreted, all of those types of things. So as you get this better understanding of the data, you have that connection between those systems. So forget the term, right? The key part of that concept is it's creating a correlation between disparate data so that you can better make decisions. So maybe, Andy, if you wanted to sort of walk us through too, right? Part of the process when you look at and start to build a data mesh is simplifying the data you have to only focus on the things that are important, right? If you've got 6, 7, 8 different systems you're looking at, and each of those have 100+ fields, your use case might only need 4, 5, 6, 20, whatever it may be from each of those. Andy, if you want to kick us off, and then Master Sergeant, if you want to kind of expand as well, how are you approaching that process? How would you recommend someone who's not an expert in data being able to look at that, not get disparaged, and kind of say, wait, what do I need? What do I actually need to accomplish this?
So, I think you bring up some great frameworks and architectures. I think when you're looking at a modern framework, like whether it's like a lakehouse or data mesh, I think one of the great things that it aligns so well with fraud on is like the fact that you can combine your structured data, your unstructured data, your semi-structured data. If it's things like claims and payments and businesses and things that you want to analyze, there's so many different types of data, and being able to work with all of those in a cohesive, platform or integrated layer where you can have proper governance and security and management, and run your BI and your more advanced anomaly detection models. If we're talking about something like identifying potential improper payments, having that sort of framework is a great starting point, and certainly leans itself well to all sorts of ways to identify and combat improper payments. So I would say that. And then from there, to Sean's point, your data curation and your ETL is highly important. I tend to gravitate towards a medallion architecture, but working with ways to integrate, ingest, and curate that data, so that you have reliable data. I think one of the things that is tough to a lot. It could be the soldiers we were talking about earlier with their spreadsheet is can you trust the data? And I think the more you can do that type of engineering work up front, and then iteratively to say, hey, why does this address in San Francisco keep coming up hundreds of times for four different business or for hundreds of different businesses? Like that doesn't make sense. But the more you have like a robust data set that you can trust, rely on, and also share, I think is really big. And then I think another part of the question was the identifying the types of data and trying to focus on subsets that matter. I think for a variety of reasons. You want to remove the data silos. To me, I think that's one of the biggest problems we see today. So removing that, but then figuring out, okay, like what is relevant? Are we looking at businesses? Then we want to look at, okay, what's the history of that business? What are the addresses? What's our history with that particular vendor? Looking at all of those things ahead of time. So, has it been flagged? So I think the more that you can down on that, you can probably, in some ways, you can get better results. You can also reduce your costs and the technical burden for a lot of these things. But that would be my recommendation and starting point for something like that.
Yeah, and I think that's a really great starting point. It's also, there are some more complex frameworks in there around larger data sets, larger approaches. Maybe Master Sergeant, if you can, you're just kind of two-part, right? How are you at the software factory focused on whittling down the data that's important, but then supporting an understanding of that data, right? How are you approaching, especially knowing that you have a lot of your newer recruits that are coming in that aren't from that data side as well? How are you approaching that with your teams?
Yeah, so one of the main things that we always get asked for at the software factory is a dashboard or a COP. Every single commander or director wants a dashboard or a COP, which we understand because they want to see the data, right? But what we have to really dig down into is what decisions are they trying to make? Once we can identify what decisions they're trying to make, then we can, shape those data sets to really get after that problem. But when we're looking in the fraud, waste, and abuse space, it's and other spaces, even if we're only using certain data points for the commander to make their decisions, what other data points are we gathering, and what insights can we gain from those other data points? One place that we used this was we were getting asked for a heat map for fires for one of the cores, asking, we're sending out all of these fires, or we're getting fires in and trying to counter fire, and they had all this data, but they couldn't visualize it. It was somebody with sticky notes trying to put them on a map saying like, oh, we received fire from here, we fired to over here, trying to figure all those things out. But there was already Army systems that were capturing this data, and we had it available, but nobody knew that how to use it, how to visualize it. And so we took that data in, and then we're able to not only show where we were firing and our points of our points of fire to our points of impact. We were also able to calculate the same thing for any fires that we were receiving in to give them an overall map. But because they've never used that data in that way before, even though it was being captured. I mean, the system that was capturing it is a 15, 20-year-old system. So we've had these points for a very long time, but because nobody's ever investigated what data points we're actually gathering, they didn't know that they could gain these insights. And then is there somewhere in all of those, the process that data is moving throughout your mesh that you could insert some, AI or machine learning to change or to give those insights to your commander to make different decisions. So, flagging transactions for fraud, waste, and abuse, or seeing that there's an anomaly. When you have millions of data points, the human in the loop is not going to catch those things. So I think that it's identifying what data the commander wants or needs to make those decisions and what decisions are being made with that data, and then seeing what other periphery that you're grabbing those data points from, and if there's anything that you can use in there to make additional decisions.
And are there, maybe if you can share, are there sort of some core analyses that your team approaches as they're starting with some of the data? Whether that's, I think from a fraud, waste, and abuse perspective, obviously there's trends and basic trends and anomalies that you can start looking at for patterns. Are there a core grouping of analyses that you look at, Master Sergeant, and then Andy, if you want to share some of the same thoughts, right? So as maybe they know there's an issue, they're not entirely sure what's driving that issue, and so they're trying to better understand. They figured out their data and what some of the critical data points are. Now they're really trying to look at those data sets and compare and try and figure out, well, where do I need to spend my time?
Yeah, so I'd say it really depends, right? It depends on the problem set. It depends on what we're really looking at, whether we focus on certain areas. So every team in the software factory is probably going to take a little bit of a different approach when it comes to the data that they're gathering, depending on what problem space that they're currently in. So I think, Andy, you might have some better insight on that.
One thing that you said, Mr. Surgeon, that I really like and advocate for is human in the loop. Anytime I'm thinking about AI for any of these things, I think it should totally center around the human. I think that from like a governance and management standpoint, that's important, but also even effectiveness. There's still so many things that humans are way better than AI at, and one of them here would be like the specific domain knowledge and understanding of like what is relevant and what is not. So I think using that and then creating an iterative framework where you're making continuous improvements to your model and training it in a way that leads to higher correlative results and better identification of whether it's like anomalies or entity resolution or what have you. So both embedding machine learning and training into that model, but also looking at what the human is saying and these standpoints. And I think that could also help refine the data set and types of data you want to integrate to achieve the outcomes of the use cases too.
Yeah, no, I think that's good. And I want to be able to save at least a couple of minutes for questions. So maybe we'll kind of go with our one of our wrap-up questions. I think so. The whole goal of this conversation is how to be able to do more with less, right? How do we use existing infrastructure, existing technology, existing information to be able to accomplish some of these goals? So maybe I'll take it for two different perspectives. Andy, I'll start with you, and then Master Sergeant, we can go to you. Is how do you, if you could sort of envision how agencies and industry could better partner to enable instances like this that aren't necessarily, there's not going to be a contract that's coming from it. It's just how do we better engage with each other to improve outcomes like this?
I think I really would say we start with knowing who your client or end user is. I think and the things that they care about. But I think we're at this unique time where that there's a huge priority from the government and these agencies to look at things like fraud, waste, abuse, improper payments, creating efficiencies. So it's probably something that a lot of folks you work with care about. And then from there, it's a collaborative effort to me. So when I think about some of the best work that my team has done over the years, it had a lot of different folks and types of folks involved. So not just the people that we were serving, but maybe the people they were serving or other relevant stakeholders and end users, but also contractors too who know the landscape or understand the architecture and the systems and the data that's relevant to what it is we're trying to solve in this use case. So that would be what I would suggest is as a starting point. Collaborate with government, industry, other folks who've had success in this area. Start to learn from them and use your knowledge of that particular domain space and customer area or agency, whether it's defense or otherwise, and start to ideate and implement and design use cases that can reach towards those outcomes that are so important to mission these days.
Yeah, and Master Sergeant, what about your thoughts?
Yeah, I think you made a good point about, at the national level, we're looking at more efficiency across the government, but we're also implementing agile development and agile contracts, right? And I think that trying to understand how to use those things is going to be, super beneficial to the government agencies as well as vendors to be able to try and get at least a way to try and help combat these things, right? So instead of having to wait for this huge mega contract to go after this very large problem, it's being able to get those agile contracts out there that can iterate on a lot of different ways we can combat these different things. And I think venues such as this are a great opportunity to try and open those discussions up and find out what vendors can maybe provide for your agency. And then again, going back to the training, these contracts mostly have all of this training already associated with them, especially these large contracts like Microsoft. And so it's using those tools to try and help your agency get that understanding so they can start using them.
Yeah, and I think one point that I'll make on that too is honestly using events like this, avenues like this to engage with industry. It's coming from the industry side and having been on both sides too, right? I mean, it's in our best interest to make sure that customers who are interested in a product or a process are supported and that they're excited and that they're seeing success in it. And so, is industry going to invest hundreds of hours in that for one use case? Probably not, right? Because we'd get fired. But the fact of the matter is, if it's a 30-minute conversation or an hour or even maybe a couple of hours, and it's just sharing how you could approach something if you already know that you're going to use that particular product or you're facing this particular problem set, don't be afraid to ask. I don't know many people on the industry side that wouldn't at least have a conversation. And so I think, yeah, I mean, and it's, I think to me, it's a great way. I think sometimes there's not a weird dynamic. Sometimes people are just afraid to ask in either direction and just should be. I mean, I think it's, okay. So I think we only have a minute or two left. So I do want to save that minute or two for questions or. Okay.
Yeah, I don't know whether we're explicitly saying like we're gonna go after that, but we are a finite resource. So at the Army Software Factory, we have about 120 soldiers on the ground at any given time to be able to go after those problems. And because of that, we can't attack full stack problems on a super regular basis. And also because Army senior leaders are generally dictating a little bit of our paths depending on what's going on. And so we do have a product office that takes in all of our problem submissions. And they look at those, and one thing that they're trying to identify is if there is already an enterprise solution available, that's where they point those users to, so that we're not competing with an enterprise solution. But we additionally have used, like you saw with the medical problem, we've additionally used current enterprise systems to solve problems just because they make sense for the use case. Now, they don't make sense for every use case, so the Army Software Factory can't be the Army Power Apps Factory and just create Power Apps over and over again, because the use cases are very specific for when they're applicable. But we do try and, whenever we take in a problem, see if there's something out there that's already solving it, whether it's an Army program of record or an existing enterprise system that we can point them to.
Awesome. All right. Well, I think we are right at time. So I do want to just thank our panelists, Master Sergeant Ost and Andy. Appreciate your time today. Definitely appreciate the conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I want to thank you, Sean, for being on this panel. Thank you so much for a very insightful discussion and perspectives you shared. If you guys are interested in learning more about what AFCEA does or becoming a member, please come and see us at our booth 123 downstairs in the exhibit hall. So thank you guys so much. We hope you enjoy the rest of your day. And if the panelists stick around, you can ask them questions. So thank you.